The dry slam of that car door hit my ears like a judge's gavel reading out a sentence. I stood there on the cracked cement sidewalk, gripping the handle of my old tobacco-colored leather suitcase, the one that had traveled with me on business trips across the state back when I still had the strength to fight with suppliers. Through the tinted window, I saw my only son's eyes dodge mine. He started the engine with a guilty haste, and the car pulled away, kicking up a cloud of gray dust that settled into my throat like ash. My name is Leocadia, and that day, under the merciless sun of a Tuesday afternoon that seemed to mock my misfortune, I felt the world shrink until it choked me. At 74, I had survived terrible droughts on my land, plagues that threatened to devour my coffee fields, and hardest of all, a divorce 3 decades earlier that left my heart armored and my hands full of calluses. But nothing, absolutely nothing in my long life, had prepared me to watch my own son's back disappear while he abandoned me like an old dog left on a forgotten highway. "It's just for a few days, Mama," he told me that morning, packing my clothes into the suitcase with a suspicious clumsiness. "They have to fumigate the big house. Termites are eating the roof beams. I'll come get you Friday. I promise." I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too painful to accept all at once. Rogelio had always been weak-willed, moldable like fresh clay. He took after his father, the man I'd had to throw out of my life and off my land because he loved gambling and drink more than honest work. I thought I'd raised Rogelio differently, with discipline and love. But blood sometimes pulls harder than upbringing. I turned toward the building behind me. A faded wooden sign read Golden Twilight Residence. The name was a cruel joke. The building was a square structure painted a washed-out melon color, surrounded by a garden where flowers fought to survive among poorly cut weeds. It didn't smell like home. It smelled of cheap disinfectant, overcooked vegetable soup, and beneath all of it, stale loneliness. "Dona Leocadia?" a shrill voice asked behind me. I turned to see a young nurse chewing gum with her mouth open, wearing a uniform a size too big. "Yes, that's me," I answered, straightening my spine. It cracked, but I kept my chin high. Dignity was the only thing left in that suitcase, and I wasn't leaving it at the door. "Your son already checked you in. Come, I'll show you your bed." I walked down the green-tiled hallway, listening to the echo of my own footsteps. On either side, in wheelchairs or sunken armchairs, I saw faces like maps of forgotten lives. Men and women staring into nothing, waiting for an ending that took too long to arrive. I shivered. I wasn't like them. I had my ranch, La Candelaria, 300 hectares of fertile land I defended tooth and nail after my divorce. I had accounts to review, foremen to supervise. I was only here for a fumigation. The room they assigned me was small and shared. In the other bed, a tiny woman slept with her mouth open, breathing with a soft whistle. I set my suitcase on the assigned bed, a hard mattress with sheets washed so many times they'd gone nearly transparent. "Friday," I whispered to myself like a mantra. "Friday, Rogelio comes." The first days crawled by with an exasperating slowness. I refused to fully unpack. I only took out my toiletries, a nightgown, and my prayer book. I spent hours sitting on a wooden bench in the back patio, staring at the black iron gate, ignoring the other residents' attempts to draw me into their bingo games or their circular talk about illnesses and grandchildren who never called. I didn't belong there. I was the owner of La Candelaria. My place was in my mahogany office, checking grain prices, not there, watching flies land on the rims of plastic cups. Friday came. I woke early, bathed in cold water because the hot had run out, and put on my best dress, a cream linen one I wore to Massachusetts. I combed my white hair into an impeccable bun and sat on the patio bench facing the gate. The hours fell like drops of lead. 9 in the morning. 11. Lunch passed and I didn't want to eat. 3 in the afternoon, the sun began to sink, painting the sky orange and violet, colors that on my ranch were a glorious spectacle, but they felt like the omen of an eternal darkness. The gate never opened. Something must have come up at work, I thought, a knot in my stomach making it hard to breathe. Or the fumigation ran longer than planned. "He'll come tomorrow. Saturday, surely." But Saturday dawned grey and rainy, and Rogelio never appeared. Sunday was a day of tomb-like silence in the home, broken only by the television in the common room. I stayed on the bench, wrapped in a wool shawl, because the cold of disappointment cut through my bones deeper than the rain. On Monday, I decided to borrow the administration's phone. "It's only for emergencies, Grandma," the receptionist told me, a woman with a bitter face who didn't even look up. "My name is Leocadia, not Grandma," I snapped, in a tone that made her lift her eyes from her magazine. "And this is an emergency. My son hasn't come." I dialed Rogelio's number. My fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from contained rage. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "The number you dialed is out of service or temporarily unavailable." I hung up gently, though inside I wanted to rip the receiver from the wall. I tried the house number, my house, my ranch. No one answered, only the endless silence of a dead line. That's when the first crack appeared in my hope. A thin crack, but a deep one. A week passed, then 2. The bland, tasteless food began to seem normal. The smell of bleach and old age stopped bothering me so much. I began to notice things I had ignored the first days out of my own arrogance. I noticed that the woman in the next bed, Dona Matilda, wasn't changed until the smell became unbearable. I noticed Friday's meal was the whole week's leftovers ground into an unrecognizable puree. I noticed that at night, when the families weren't there, because they were almost never there, the way some nurses treated us changed, turning rough, impatient, sometimes cruel. "Shut your mouth, crazy old woman," I heard an aide shout one night in the hallway. My heart pounded in the dark. I, Leocadia, the woman who had negotiated with bankers and politicians, was now at the mercy of people who saw us as burdens with an expiration date. By the end of 3 weeks of confinement, an icy truth settled in my chest. Rogelio was not coming back. There had been no termites, no fumigation. It had all been an elaborate lie staged by a coward who didn't have the nerve to look me in the eye and tell me I was in the way. Surely his wife, that woman with a cat's smile and a calculator's eyes, had convinced him. "Your mother is too old now, Rogelio. The ranch needs young people. She'd be better off somewhere she can be cared for." I could hear their voices in my head as clearly as if they stood before me. At first the rage was an uncontrolled fire. I wanted to scream, break the windows, demand they let me out. But then I remembered who I was. I was not a senile old woman to be discarded. I was Leocadia, mistress of La Candelaria. And if life had taught me anything after my divorce, it was that the one who gets angry loses, but the one who thinks, wins. One afternoon, watching a caretaker sneakily steal cookies from a blind old man, I felt something hard in the bottom of my pocket. It was the key to my desk at the ranch. Rogelio, in his haste and stupidity, hadn't taken the personal keys I always kept pinned to my dress. And more importantly, he had no idea what I kept in the false bottom of that old leather suitcase he himself had tossed into the room. That night, while Matilda snored softly, I got up from bed. My knees ached, but my determination was stronger than any arthritis. I dragged the suitcase to the bathroom, the only place with a little light from the hallway window. With fingers that still carried the strength of years of manual work, I felt along the inside. There it was. I pulled out a small black notebook and a thick manila envelope. Rogelio thought I was an old-fashioned woman who kept money under the mattress. What he didn't know, because he never took an interest in the family's real business, is that years earlier, foreseeing that old age brings vulnerability, I had made financial moves neither he nor my ex-husband knew about. The ranch was the visible wealth, yes, but it was not my only strength. I opened the notebook. My eyes traveled over numbers and bank accounts that had sat quiet for years, gathering interest, waiting for an emergency. Well, this was the emergency. I looked at myself in the stained bathroom mirror. I saw my deep wrinkles, like furrows in plowed earth. I saw my white hair disheveled, but in my eyes, those black eyes I'd inherited from my father, there were no more tears, no more pleading. There was a metallic glint, cold and cutting. A full month had passed. 30 days waiting on that bench. 30 days eating garbage. 30 days watching how they treated the elderly like useless cattle. Rogelio believed he had left me there to die, to be consumed by sadness, clearing his path to sell the ranch and spend the money on his whims. He thought Friday would never come. He was wrong. Very well, my son, I whispered to the mirror, my voice hoarse but firm. You wanted me to stay here? Then I'll stay. But not the way you think. I put the documents back in the suitcase and closed it with a click that sounded final in the silence of the night. I lay down on the hard bed, ignoring the smell of damp, and for the first time in a month, I slept deeply. Not the sleep of the innocent. I slept the sleep of a general resting before the final battle. Tomorrow I would not wait on that bench. Tomorrow I would start moving my pieces. Because if my son had thrown me to the lions, he didn't know I was the one holding the whip. That month of humiliation was about to become the fuel of my revenge, and every tear I hadn't shed, I was going to collect, peso by peso, hectare by hectare. I woke the next morning before the sun dared cross the dirty windows of room 204. It wasn't the crowing of my ranch roosters that pulled me from sleep, nor the smell of fresh coffee that used to rise from La Candelaria's kitchen. It was the metal clang of a cleaning cart hitting the doorframe and the sour smell of cheap bleach mixed with old urine. But unlike the previous 30 days, I did not open my eyes with the heaviness of a victim. I opened them with the cold clarity of someone who has drawn a war map in the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed, ignoring the sharp pain in my knees. Dona Matilda, my roommate, was still asleep, wheezing that asthmatic whistle that had kept me from resting the first nights. I looked at her with a mix of pity and rage. She was a small, wasted woman, forgotten by God and her family. She had bruises on her arms, marks the nurses called sensitive skin, but that I recognized as the fingerprints of impatient, rough hands. No more, Matilda, I whispered to the empty nightgown. No more. That day I didn't go to the patio bench to wait for Rogelio. That woman, the devoted mother staring at the gate with beaten dog eyes, had died the night before. In her place, a strategist was born. I dressed with deliberate slowness, choosing a button-down blouse that, though old, still held the starch of its last real ironing. I put on my orthopedic shoes and walked into the hallway. My mission was clear. I needed information, and I needed communication. The dining hall was vast and depressing, chipped formica tables and plastic chairs that stuck to your clothes. Breakfast was a grayish watery oatmeal that tasted like wet cardboard, and hard bread that defied any denture. I sat in a strategic corner where I could watch the administration office door and the movement of the nurses. I observed the director, a woman named Gertrudis Poveda. She was an unpleasant creature, wide-hipped and with a viper's gaze, who always walked with a folder under her arm like a royal scepter. I had seen her smile falsely at the few visiting family members, then, the moment they left, twist her expression and bark orders at her staff. Save on the detergent, I heard her hiss that morning to a cleaning girl. The budget doesn't cover washing sheets every day. If they're not soiled, just shake them out and flip them. I felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the oatmeal. So that was the game. Pinching pennies at the cost of old people's dignity to line her own pockets. Rogelio paid a monthly fee that, while not a fortune, should at least cover clean sheets. Corruption hung in the stale air of that place. I needed to call my lawyer. Not the pushover Rogelio used for his skirt-chasing troubles, but my lifelong lawyer, Anselmo Barragan, a man of my generation, as tough and stubborn as I was, retired 5 years now, but who owed me favors money couldn't buy. The problem was the phone. The one at reception was watched by the bitter receptionist, and my cell phone had mysteriously vanished from my purse the first week, no doubt stolen by some light-fingered employee. My eyes landed on a young, slight girl mopping the floor near my table half-heartedly. Her name was Rocio. She was new, or at least it seemed that way, because she didn't yet have the dead-eyed look of the other employees. I'd seen her hand a tissue to a crying old man, or stop to listen to a repeated story without rolling her eyes. I waited for the right moment. When Director Poveda went into her office and slammed the door, I got up and walked toward Rocio. I pretended to stumble near her. "Oh," I exclaimed, grabbing her arm. "Careful, Senora Leocadia," the girl said, dropping her mop to steady me. Her hands were rough, working hands, like mine 50 years ago. "Thank you, dear," I said, lowering my voice into a conspirator's whisper. "Listen carefully and don't look at anyone. I need your help." The girl tensed, fear filling her dark eyes. "I can't, Dona Leocadia. The director says we can't fraternize." "I don't want to be your friend, Rocio. I want to make a deal," I cut in firmly. I reached into my skirt pocket and pulled out the only thing of value Rogelio hadn't noticed. A simple gold ring with a small ruby, a jewel my grandmother gave me before she died. It wasn't worth a fortune, but for a girl mopping floors for minimum wage, it was treasure. "This is yours if you lend me your phone for 5 minutes. Right now, in the visitor's bathroom." Rocio looked at the ring, then at the director's office. Greed and need fought a quick battle on her young face. "Need 1. In the back bathroom," she whispered. "Wait 2 minutes. If they catch me, I'm fired. No one will know. I'm old, not stupid." I walked to the bathroom, my heart racing, not from fear but from the adrenaline of action I hadn't felt since I negotiated my last coffee harvest against the market coyotes. Locked in the farthest stall, with Rocio's cheap, cracked screen phone in my hands, I dialed a number I knew by heart. Anselmo Barragan. "Hello," a raspy voice answered, weathered by years and tobacco. "Anselmo, it's Leocadia. Don't ask, just listen." There was silence on the line, followed by a startled cough. "Leocadia, woman of God. Rogelio said that you were senile, that you didn't want to talk to anyone, that you'd retired to rest. I've been trying to visit you at the ranch for weeks, but the guards won't let me in." My son's lie was more elaborate than I'd imagined. Rage rose in my throat like bile, but I swallowed it. "Rogelio is an idiot and a liar, Anselmo. I'm locked in a run-down nursing home on the other side of the city. He abandoned me here, but I don't have time for grieving. I need you to do something, and I need you to do it today. Anything, Leocadia, just tell me. I'm going to the police." "No. The police take time, and Rogelio is my son. If I make a scandal, he'll claim I've lost my mind and could have me legally declared incompetent before I can lift a finger. I need to cut off the serpent's head, not step on its tail." I took a deep breath. What I was about to say hurt more than any physical blow. It meant ripping out my roots. It meant selling my history. "I want you to sell La Candelaria, Anselmo." The silence on the other end was like a tomb. "What, Leocadia? That land is your life. Your father died in those furrows. You built that estate up when your husband nearly sank it in debt." "I know," I said, and my voice cracked for 1 millisecond. "Only one. But the land does me no good if I'm a prisoner. The coffee fields do me no good if I'm going to die smelling of urine in this hole. Rogelio thinks the ranch will be his when I die. He thinks he only has to wait. I'm going to take that prize away from him, Anselmo. I'm going to sell it, and I want it fast. The market's slow right now. I don't care about market price. Sell it below value if you have to, but I want cash in an account Rogelio doesn't know about before the week ends. Call the hotel investors who were sniffing around last year. They'll pay cash. All right, Leocadia, I'll do it. But what are you going to do with all that money? Leave the country." I looked at the mold stains on the tile. I thought of Matilda, of the grey oatmeal, of Director Poveda's contempt. And then the idea that had germinated overnight bloomed, complete, dark, and magnificent. "No, Anselmo. I'm not leaving. I'm going to buy." "Buy what?" "Find out who owns this pigsty, the nursing home, the Golden Twilight. Find out if they have debts, if they want to sell. From what I've seen, the management is a disaster and they're stealing to stay afloat. They must owe taxes. Find the owner and make him an offer he can't refuse. I want to buy the nursing home, Anselmo. I want to be the owner of my own prison. Anselmo let out a dry laugh, a laugh of admiration. You're a force of nature, Leocadia. You always were. No, Anselmo. Nature is an amateur compared to a betrayed mother. Do it. I hung up and erased the call log. I stepped out of the bathroom and returned the phone to Rocio, sliding the ring into her sweaty palm. She looked at me with gratitude, not knowing she had just become an accomplice to a coup. The following days were a torture of controlled anxiety. I kept my routine to avoid suspicion. I ate the garbage they served, let myself be taken to the patio, endured the condescending looks of the nurses. But my ears were sharper than ever. I dedicated myself to studying the terrain. I discovered by listening to conversations that weren't mine, that the hot water boiler had been broken for 6 months and the owner refused to fix it. I learned the food came from expired donations that the director billed as gourmet purchases. I understood the staff wasn't cruel by nature, but underpaid, exploited, and embittered. Cruelty is contagious, and in that place it was an epidemic running from the top down. One afternoon, pretending to doze in a lobby armchair, I heard Director Poveda on the phone through her half-open door. "I already told you there's no money, sir," she shrieked, her voice tinged with hysteria. "If we don't sell this place soon, the tax office will seize the catheters. I'm sick of working miracles with the books. Yes, yes. Find a buyer, any idiot who wants to take on these old people." I smiled to myself. My instinct wasn't wrong. The prey was wounded and bleeding. That night, lying in my hard bed, I cried. I cried in silence for La Candelaria. I cried remembering the oak tree where I buried my dogs, the porch where I watched Rogelio take his first steps, the black earth that used to get under my nails. Selling the ranch was amputating a limb, erasing my history. But it was necessary. For years I had been meek. I was the woman who endured a drunken husband's infidelities to keep the family together. I was the mother who forgave again and again, a spoiled son's weakness. I was the old woman who got into that car trusting an empty promise. But that woman, that soft, permissive Leocadia, had died in this room, suffocated by loneliness and disillusion. What remained was something else. A creature made of calculation and survival. On Friday, exactly 1 month and 4 days after my arrival, Rocio approached me while dusting the windows. Without looking at me, she let a folded slip of paper fall into my lap. I opened it with trembling hands under my shawl. It was a note from Anselmo, written in his sharp handwriting. "Everything ready. La Candelaria sold yesterday. Money secured." The nursing home's owner accepted the offer this morning. Thought a miracle had fallen from the sky. Papers drawn up under the shell company we created years ago. No one knows it's you. I sign on your behalf Monday. Get ready. I crumpled the paper in my fist until my knuckles went white. A wave of power surged through my body, a heat that came from neither the sun nor the non-existent heating. I looked around at the peeling walls, the dirty floor, the sad faces of my fellow prisoners. They didn't know it yet, but their luck was about to change. So was that of my tormentors. I got up from the armchair and walked to the dining hall. Director Poveda was there, scolding an old man who had spilled his soup. "You're useless, Don Gregorio," she shouted. "Look what you did. Now you'll eat it cold." I stopped a few feet from her. For the first time in a month, I didn't lower my gaze. I fixed it on her eyes with an intensity that made her stop short. "What are you staring at, woman?" Poveda snapped with contempt. "Want me to send you to your room without dinner?" "I'm looking at the filth," I answered, my voice calm but carrying across the silent dining hall, "and thinking how hard it is to remove stains once they've been ground in a long time." Poveda let out a mocking laugh. "Well, start cleaning if it bothers you so much. This isn't your ranch here, Your Highness. Here you're nobody." "You're right," I said, a cold, almost cruel smile forming on my lips. "Today I'm nobody. But time is a curious thing, Director. Sometimes it turns very fast." I turned and walked to my table, leaving her mid-sentence with a confused expression. She had no idea she was speaking to the owner. She had no idea every scream, every insult, every plate of rotten food was being recorded on a mental blacklist I reviewed every night. The plan was in motion. The ranch, my beloved Candelaria, was no longer mine. The grief of that loss was a hole in my chest, but I would fill it with something sweeter. Justice. The days between the call and my legal ownership felt like walking on a frozen lake. The surface seemed calm, but beneath my feet, dark currents moved violently enough to sweep everything away. I became an actress worthy of an award, playing the resigned old woman, accepting her fate as old furniture stacked in a corner. Inside, every nerve in my body vibrated with anticipation. On Monday morning, exactly as planned, Director Poveda burst into the common room. "Senora Leocadia," she bellowed, making Matilda jump in her seat. "You have a visitor. A lawyer. Barragan. Says he's here for pending paperwork." My heart leapt, but I kept my hands still on my lap, lacing my fingers so she wouldn't notice the tremor. "Tell him to come in, please," I answered gently. "He can't come in here," she replied, arms crossed. "Take him to the small office, the one we use for the priest's confessions. And quickly, I don't want strangers wandering the halls." I stood with feigned slowness, leaning on the armrests as if it cost me my life, though my legs wanted to run. In the small office, Anselmo waited, wearing his eternal grey suit, a little shiny at the elbows from use, and his worn leather briefcase on his knees. Seeing me enter, his eyes welled up, but he held it in, stood, and offered me the chair. "Leocadia," he whispered, taking my hands. His palms were warm and dry. I look old and tired, Anselmo. Don't lie." I cut him off, sitting down. "But my head still works better than everyone in this building. Do you have it?" He nodded and pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. "The ranch sale closed yesterday. The money's already in the Phoenix Shell Company account, as you ordered. And here," he pulled out another sheaf of papers clipped in blue. "Here's the purchase agreement for the nursing home." My hands caressed the paper. Legal paper, thick, official. The current owner, a Mr. Cifuentes, was desperate, Anselmo explained quietly, glancing at the half-open door. Gambling debts, tax problems. When I offered to buy the home quietly, debts and all, he nearly kissed my feet. Didn't ask a single question about who Phoenix's partners were. Just wanted the check. "And Poveda?" I asked, nodding toward the hallway. "She knows nothing. Cifuentes hasn't said a word, afraid she'll steal something before she leaves or sabotage the sale. She thinks I'm still your personal lawyer handling some matter about your will." "Perfect," I said, a crooked smile forming. "I want to sign right now." Anselmo handed me a heavy, cold fountain pen. "Leocadia, once you sign this, there's no going back. The ranch, your home, won't be yours anymore. You're trading 300 hectares of coffee and freedom for this building full of problems and dying people." I looked at the pen. I thought of the smell of wet earth at La Candelaria. I thought of the silence of my nights there. But then I thought of Rogelio leaving me here like a dog. I thought of Poveda screaming at Matilda. I thought of the watery soup. The ranch was my past, a glorious but lonely past. This place was my present battlefield, and I had never run from a fight. "Freedom isn't in the land, Anselmo," I said, uncapping the pen. "Freedom is not having to bow your head to anyone." I signed. My signature, Leocadia Viuda de Montenegro, stamped onto the dotted line with strong, angular strokes. The black ink gleamed for a moment before drying, sealing the fate of everyone living under that roof. "Done," Anselmo said, quickly putting away the documents. "The legal transfer takes effect Monday morning. You have 4 days, Leocadia. 4 days as a ghost in your own house." 4 days, I repeated. "Will be enough." When I left the office, I ran into Director Poveda. "Finished with your little papers?" she asked, sweeping me with her gaze. I hope that lawyer brought good news about your pension, because your son Rogelio is 2 weeks behind on the monthly payment. If he doesn't pay by Friday, I'll have to move you to the charity ward. And believe me, you don't want to be there. No windows. A flare of anger rose in my throat, but I swallowed it with the coldness of an executioner sharpening his axe. Don't worry, Director, I said, lowering my head in false submission. It'll all be resolved very soon. God will provide. Well, God doesn't pay the electric bill, she grumbled, turning and walking away with that heavy, arrogant gait. Enjoy it, Gertrudis, I thought, watching her broad back retreat. Enjoy your last days of reign, because the guillotine is already built. The next 3 days I dedicated to a silent audit. I was no longer the complaining resident. I was the owner inspecting her investment. Wednesday morning I slipped toward the kitchen amid breakfast chaos. I stood near the service door, pretending to look for a glass of water. I saw the cook, a sweaty man in an apron stained with old grease, pulling packages of meat from the fridge and stuffing them into a gym bag. Good cuts. Beef we never saw on our plates. We ate boiled cartilage and skin. What are you doing, Grandma? The cook barked, catching me and zipping the bag shut. Get out of here, the kitchen's off limits. I just wanted some water, young man, I said, my voice trembling, stepping back. Forgive me. Leave or I'll call Poveda, he threatened, turning back to his work. I walked away, but my mind was already taking notes. Immediate termination, inventory review, theft complaint. That afternoon I sat in the hallway near the nursing station, pretending to doze with my head on my chest, my ears sharp as radar. I heard 2 nurses talking while sorting medications. Hey, the woman in 305 is due for the expensive antibiotic, the one for the kidney infection, a young voice said. Give her half the dose, a rougher, indifferent voice answered. Poveda said to stretch the boxes till the end of the month. If she dies, well, it was her time. Family never visits anyway. I clenched my jaw so hard I felt a sharp pain in it. They were gambling with our lives to save a few pesos that surely ended up in the director's pocket. Thursday was the hardest day. It rained all afternoon, a persistent grey rain that made the home smell even more of confinement and sadness. The dining hall roof leaked, and no one placed buckets. Water pooled on the 4 mica tables and the floor, a slipping hazard for anyone. I saw Dona Matilda trying to eat dinner with trembling hands. Her spoon fell to the floor. Oh, how clumsy! An aide shouted, picking it up carelessly and without washing it, handing it right back to her. Eat and stop bothering me. I stood, my knees creaking, and walked to Matilda's table. Allow me, I told the aide, my voice for a second forgetting its disguise of frailty. Bring her a clean spoon. The aide looked at me, surprised by my tone. And who do you think you are? I'm someone who knows hygiene is basic, I said, holding her gaze. Bring her a clean spoon or I swear I'll scream until the police, the press, or the Pope himself shows up. At my age I have nothing left to lose. The woman hesitated, saw something in my eyes. Maybe that metallic glint Anselmo knew well. She clicked her tongue but went to the kitchen and brought another spoon, tossing it onto the table. Here, difficult old woman, she muttered. I sat beside Matilda and helped her eat. She looked at me through cataract-clouded eyes and smiled a toothless, pure smile. Thank you, Leocadia, she whispered. You're very brave. You're going to see just how brave, Matilda, I promised quietly. Hang on a little longer. Just a little more. That night, lying in the dark, I reviewed my plan. Anselmo would arrive Monday at 9 with the notary and the final papers. I would rise, dress in my finest, kept at the bottom of the suitcase, and wait in the lobby. But one piece was missing. Rogelio. I needed to know about him. I needed his betrayal to be absolute before I carried out my sentence. Friday morning, the same day his imaginary deadline expired, I went to reception. The bitter receptionist wasn't there. In her place was Rocio, covering the shift while the other woman had breakfast. Rocio, I said. Has my son called? The girl looked at me with pity, dropping her eyes to the logbook. Dona Leocadia, I don't know if I should say. Tell me, dear. The truth hurts once. The lie hurts every time it's remembered. He called yesterday, she confessed in a whisper. He talked to Director Poveda. I was cleaning nearby and overheard. What did he say? He said he wasn't coming this Friday either, that he's going to the beach with his wife for the weekend, and that if you asked, they should tell you the car was in the shop. I closed my eyes. A trip to the beach. While I counted ceiling leaks and defended my companion's right to eat with clean silverware, my son was going to bask in the sun with money pulled from my ranch's harvests I had taught him to grow. And there's something else, Rocio added, her voice shaking. The director told him you were very deteriorated, that you barely spoke anymore, and that it was better he not visit so as not to upset you, that it was better you slowly forget your old life. So there it was. Poveda and Rogelio, allied for convenience. She wanted a docile patient who caused no problems and whose son paid without asking questions. He wanted to erase his guilt, believing I no longer had the awareness to know better. They had buried me alive and were shoveling dirt over my coffin while shaking hands over the deal. I opened my eyes. It no longer hurt. The pain had calcified, becoming a marble column holding my spine straighter than ever. Thank you, Rocio, I said. I took a 20 peso bill from my pocket, the last cash I had, and pressed it into her hand. Buy yourself something nice. And Monday, try to arrive early, and wear a clean uniform. It's going to be an important day. Why, Dona Leocadia? Are you leaving? I smiled. It wasn't a grandmother's smile. It was the smile of a landowner before the harvest. No, Rocio. Quite the opposite. I've only just arrived. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and cold calm. I dedicated myself to observing every employee, mentally sorting them into 2 columns. Stays. Goes. Rocio stayed. The aide who shouted at the old people, gone. The cook who watered down the soup, gone. Poveda. Poveda would have a special fate. Sunday night I packed my suitcase, not to leave, but to mark the end of a chapter. I pulled out my navy silk dress, the one I wore to a nephew's wedding years ago. It was a little wrinkled but elegant, commanding. I hung it on the back of the chair. I pulled out my low-heeled shoes and polished them with a little spit and a handkerchief until they gleamed in the dim light. Dona Matilda watched me from her bed. Going to a party, Leocadia? She asked with innocence. Something like that, Matilda, I answered, sitting on the edge of her bed and stroking her bony hand. Tomorrow we celebrate. Tomorrow the cold soup and the fear end. Is your son coming? No, I said firmly. Someone much better is coming. Justice is coming. I lay down but didn't sleep. I spent the night listening to the sounds of the home. Coughing, groaning, the hum of the old hallway fridge. Every sound was a reminder of why I was doing this. It wasn't only for me. It was for all of us, the forgotten, the disposable. When Monday's sun began to tint the dirty curtains gray, I rose, bathed in ice-cold water without flinching, put on my silk dress, pinned my white hair into a high, tight, perfect bun. I lightly rouged my lips with a terracotta lipstick rescued from the bottom of my toiletry bag. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't a victim. She was a matriarch. She was Leocadia Montenegro, and she was about to reclaim her kingdom, not through inheritance or gifts, but bought with the sweat of her brow and the pain of her sacrifice. I stepped into the hallway. The click of my heels echoed on the cheap linoleum like warning shots. The morning shift nurses stopped and stared, open-mouthed. They had never seen me like this. Always in a robe, in old clothes. I walked toward the main lobby. It was 8:55. Director Poveda was at reception, shouting at someone on the phone. Seeing me, she dropped the receiver and froze. "What are you doing dressed like that?" she asked, coming out from behind the counter. "Where do you think you're going? You don't have permission to leave. Go back to your room immediately, or I'll call the orderlies to restrain you." I stopped in the center of the lobby. I looked at her from my full height, upright, untouchable. I'm not going anywhere, Gertrudis, I said, using her first name for the first time. It landed like a slap. How dare you call me that? Show some respect. I am the director of this facility. At that moment, the glass entrance doors opened. Anselmo walked in, impeccable, followed by two men in dark suits and a notary with his official seal in hand. Behind them came two private security guards, tall, solid men who took positions on either side of the door. Poveda looked at the newcomers, confused, then at me. The color began to drain from her fleshy face. What is this? She stammered. Lawyer Barragan, what does this mean? You can't just walk in here. This is private property. Anselmo approached and handed me a leather folder. Good morning, Senora Montenegro, he said, his voice loud and clear for everyone in the lobby to hear. Here are the master keys and the registered deed. Everything is in order. I took the folder, felt the weight of power in my hands. I turned toward Poveda, who was backing away slowly until she hit the counter. You're right, Gertrudis, I said, taking a step toward her. This is private property. I paused, savoring the absolute silence that had taken over the room. It's my private property. The silence that followed my declaration was so thick I could almost touch it, like the heavy fog that rolled down the mountain on cold mornings at La Candelaria. Gertrudis Poveda stood there, mouth half open, a grotesque statue of disbelief. Her bulging eyes darted from my face to Anselmo's, then to the security guards flanking the entrance like two granite towers. Your property, she finally stammered, her voice, once a thunderclap that terrorized the elderly, now sounding like chalk screeching on a board. Dona Leocadia, please, stop talking nonsense. This confinement is affecting your mind. Security, she shouted at the men in suits. Get this woman and these intruders out of here. But the guards didn't move a muscle. Their eyes stayed fixed ahead, ignoring her orders with a professional indifference that must have chilled her blood. Anselmo stepped forward with that old-fashioned elegance rarely seen in modern men. He opened the leather folder and pulled out the notarized document, its pages rustling with undeniable authority in the silent lobby. Senora Poveda, Anselmo said calmly, I suggest you lower your voice. These gentlemen work for the new administration, and the document in my hand is the duly registered title proving that the Phoenix Company, whose majority shareholder and sole administrator is Senora Leocadia Montenegro, is the absolute owner of this property and of the business known as Golden Twilight Residence. Gertrudis snatched the papers from Anselmo's hand violently. Her eyes raced across the lines frantically, searching for an error, a forged signature, anything to cling to while her small kingdom of terror crumbled beneath her feet. I watched her hands begin to shake. The paper trembled like a dry leaf in a windstorm. This can't be, she whispered, the red of her face giving way to a sickly paleness. Mr. Cifuentes, he would have told me. I'm the director. Mr. Cifuentes was more interested in saving his own skin from gambling debts than in warning you. I cut in, my voice coming out firm and resonant, filling the space that had suffocated me for a month. As for your position as director, let's just say your management is now under immediate audit. I walked toward her. The sound of my heels on the dirty floor marked the rhythm of her defeat. I stopped a yard away, invading her personal space, forcing her back until she hit the reception counter. Do you remember what you told me a few days ago, Gertrudis? I asked softly, tilting my head. You told me I was nobody here, that this wasn't my ranch. She swallowed loudly. Sweat began to bead on her forehead beneath the cheap makeup. Leocadia. Dona Leocadia, look, we can talk, she began, attempting a smile that came out crooked and pathetic. You know how this job is. Sometimes one gets stressed, says things one doesn't mean. If you're the owner now, you'll need someone experienced to run this place. I know the suppliers, the shifts, the medications. I let out a dry, short, joyless laugh. Oh yes. You know the suppliers. You know the butcher who sells you third-rate scraps while you bill for prime cuts. You know, the pharmacy that gives you kickbacks for buying expired generics while you charge families for brand names. Poveda's face fell apart. The fear in her eyes turned into pure panic. How do you know that? Because I've spent a month being a ghost, Gertrudis. I stepped closer and she shrank as if expecting a blow. Ghosts see everything. I saw you steal Don Gregorio's cookies. I heard you order the disinfectant diluted until it was pure water. I saw the bruises on Matilda's arms. You thought I was a senile old woman sitting in a corner waiting for death. But I was taking notes. I turned to Anselmo and nodded slightly. He signaled the guards. Gertrudis Poveda, Anselmo declared, you are terminated with immediate effect for gross negligence, misappropriation of funds, and breach of trust. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from the office. And I warn you, the notary present will conduct an inventory. If a single cent is missing from petty cash, or a single document, the criminal complaint already drafted will be filed with the prosecutor's office before you reach the corner. You can't do this to me, she shrieked, recovering her usual hysteria for an instant. I have rights. I'll call your son. Rogelio won't let you waste his inheritance on this dump. My son's name floated in the air like a poisoned threat. Poveda believed that was her winning card. She didn't understand Rogelio no longer had any power over me. Call him, I challenged, crossing my arms. Tell him his mother spent the money from selling La Candelaria buying his cage. Tell him there's no inheritance left to protect. Let's see if he comes running to save you or to cry over his lost money. The reality of my words hit her like a hammer blow. She realized she was alone, without allies, without power, trapped by an old woman she had fatally underestimated. To the office, I ordered, pointing with an imperious finger. Now. Poveda walked toward her office, escorted by one of the guards. She seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Her shoulders, once held high with arrogance, sagged. She dragged her feet. While she gathered her things under watch, I turned back to the lobby. The noise of the confrontation had drawn an audience. In the hallways, timidly peeking out, were the nurses, the cleaning staff, and behind them some of the braver residents. I saw Rocio in her clean uniform, just as I'd asked, clutching her mop against her chest like a shield, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and admiration. I saw the thieving cook peering out from the kitchen door, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. I saw the cruel nurse who withheld the pain medication, murmuring something to her colleague. I walked to the center of the room. I felt tall. My knees no longer hurt. Adrenaline is the best painkiller in the world. Attention, all staff, I called out. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I had the tone of command I used with the ranch foreman when a storm was coming. I want every employee in the lobby. Right now. No one moved at first. They were used to chaos, not real authority. I said now, I repeated, striking the floor with my heel. They began filing out, the cook, the nurses, the cleaning staff, gathering into an uneven semicircle, glancing at each other, uncertain. My name is Leocadia Montenegro, I told them, sweeping my gaze across their faces one by one. Until yesterday I was the old woman in room 204, the bothersome one, the one who didn't matter. Today I am the owner of this building, and the one who signs your checks. A murmur ran through the group. The cook went pale. The cruel nurse swallowed. I know who you are, I continued, unrelenting. I know who works with their heart and who only comes to steal and mistreat. For a month you showed me your true faces because you thought I had no power. A grave mistake. I pointed an accusing finger at the cook, my hand steady. You from the kitchen. Take out the meat you have hidden in your bag right now and set it on the table. Then leave. You're fired. And be grateful I'm not calling the police for food theft. The man tried to protest, opened his mouth to speak, but the guard's stares silenced him. He lowered his head, went to the kitchen, and returned minutes later, setting the meat packages on a side table. He walked out the front door without looking back, tail between his legs. Then I turned to the on-duty nurse, the one who had denied the painkillers. "You," I said. She stepped back. "Collect your things. I don't want you to ever touch a patient again in your life. Cruelty has no place in my house. Out." One by one, I purged the place. I fired 3 more people that morning. There were no screams, no scenes, just cold, hard justice falling like a guillotine. The air in the lobby began to change. It no longer smelled of stale fear. It began to smell of clean. When I finished the terminations, less than half the staff remained, standing there terrified, waiting their turn. I looked at Rocio. She was trembling, tears in her eyes. "Rocio," I called. "Yes, yes, ma'am," she answered in a thin voice. "Drop that mop. Starting today, you are in charge of overseeing the residents' well-being. I want you to make sure no one goes without a blanket, that no one eats with a dirty spoon, and that everyone is treated with dignity. Your salary doubles as of this moment. Do you think you can do it?" The girl's eyes went wide. She let the mop handle fall, clattering to the floor. "Yes, ma'am. Of course I can. Thank you, Dona Leocadia. Thank you. Don't thank me. Work. And find someone to clean up that puddle," I said, pointing to a leak dripping rhythmically in a corner. "Anselmo, call the contractors. I want the roof and the boiler fixed today. I don't care what it costs. I want hot water in the showers before sundown." "At your command, Patrona," Anselmo answered, using the title they'd given me at the ranch, and I saw him smile with pride. At that moment, the office door opened. Gertrudis Poveda came out carrying a cardboard box with her belongings, a plastic plant, some photo frames, her coffee mug. She walked the hallway of shame, flanked by the guard. Passing me, she stopped. Her eyes were red with contained rage. "You'll regret this, Montenegro," she hissed quietly. "This is harder than you think. Running old people and diapers isn't the same as growing coffee. You'll sink into debt. And when Rogelio finds out," I cut her off, stepping close enough to smell her sour fear. "He'll find out his mother isn't a burden. She's a businesswoman. Now get off my property before I decide prison suits you better than unemployment." Poveda pressed her lips together, took a hard step, and walked out through the glass doors into the rain that had begun falling outside. I watched her get into her small car and drive off with a screech of tires. When she disappeared, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. I turned to the residents. Dona Matilda had made her way to the lobby, leaning on her walker. Behind her, Don Gregorio, the blind old man, and others looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in weeks. "Hope. Friends," I said, softening my voice. "I'm sorry for the scene, but the house needed cleaning." "Is it true?" asked Don Gregorio, turning his head toward my voice. "Is it true you bought the home, Dona Leocadia?" "It's true, Don Gregorio. And now, what happens to us?" Matilda asked, fear in her voice. "Are you going to throw us out?" I felt a lump in my throat. I walked to her and took her cold hands in mine. "No one is leaving, Matilda. At least, no one who doesn't want to leave. But things are going to change. Today we eat meat, not scraps. Today you'll bathe in hot water, and starting today, no one, absolutely no one, will raise their voice at you. This is no longer a waiting room for death. This is our home." I saw tears run down Matilda's wrinkled cheeks. Don Gregorio nodded, smiling toward nothing. A murmur of relief and gratitude filled the room. It was my greatest moment of glory. Not when I sold my first record harvest, not when I bought my first tractor, but there, in that worn-out lobby, giving dignity back to a group of people the world had forgotten. "Anselmo," I said, returning to my business tone. "I need the office phone." I walked into the office that had been Poveda's den. Her cheap perfume still lingered, but I opened the window and let the fresh rain-washed air in, cleansing everything. I sat in the swivel chair. It was comfortable, faux leather, far better than the wooden benches in the yard. I placed my hands on the Formica desk. I felt powerful. I felt alive. I looked at the black phone on the desk. It was time for the last piece of the puzzle. I dialed Rogelio's number. It rang once, twice. "Hello," he answered. I could hear wind and music in the background. He was at the beach, exactly as Rocio had told me. His voice sounded relaxed, carefree. "Hello, son," I said. My voice came out calm, without the trembling of an abandoned mother, but with the firmness of a matriarch. There was silence on the other end. The background music seemed to stop. "Mama?" he asked, confused. "Mama, is that you? Where are you calling from?" "The director told me you weren't well, that you couldn't talk. Director Poveda no longer works here, Rogelio. There have been administrative changes." "What? What do you mean, changes?" His tone shifted from confusion to irritation. "Listen, Mama, I can't come right now. I'm on a very important business trip. The car's still in the shop. I'll come next week. I promise. Put the nurse on. You shouldn't be using the office phone." I leaned back in the chair, swiveling it gently side to side. I closed my eyes and pictured his suntanned face, his cold drink in hand, his easy lie. "There's no need to come next week, Rogelio," I said softly. "I need you to come tomorrow. I told you I can't. It's impossible. Why are you so stubborn? It's only a few more days. I'm busy. Are you at the beach, Rogelio? I can hear the gulls." The silence on the other end was absolute. I had caught him. "Mama, I just needed a break. The stress of the ranch. The ranch no longer exists for you, Rogelio." I dropped the bomb with lethal calm. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I sold La Candelaria 4 days ago. It's no longer ours. It's no longer yours." I heard a dull thud, as if the phone had fallen or he'd slammed a table. "What?" His scream nearly burst my eardrum. "You're insane. You can't sell it. That ranch is my inheritance. You're senile. I'm going to challenge that sale. I'm calling Anselmo right now. Anselmo is here with me, son." He drew up the sale. "And the money? Well, the money's already invested." "In what?" he gasped, his voice strangled with anguish. "What did you spend millions of pesos on in 4 days? Mama, tell me what you did." I smiled. A fierce, wolfish smile of a creature who has secured her territory. "Come see the nursing home, Rogelio. Come see where you live now, because your mother is no longer a resident. Your mother is the owner, and we have a lot to discuss about your overdue monthly payment." I hung up before he could respond. I sat looking at the phone for a few seconds, savoring the silence. I knew he would come. He'd come flying, consumed by greed and panic. He'd come to shout, to threaten, to try to reclaim what he thought was his. But he would find a fortress. I looked out the office window toward the inner courtyard. The rain was letting up, and a timid ray of sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the bench where I had waited for a month. That bench was no longer a place of waiting. It was a monument to my old naivety. Anselmo came into the office. "The contractors arrive in an hour, and the catering service will bring today's dinner while we hire new kitchen staff." "Thank you, Anselmo. Did you talk to him?" "Yes, he's on his way. He'll probably break the speed limit." Anselmo sat in the visitor's chair and looked at me seriously. "Leocadia, when he comes, it's going to be ugly. Rogelio is weak, but greed makes him dangerous. He'll sue you. He'll try to have you declared incompetent." "Let him try," I said, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle in my silk dress. "I have this month's medical records proving I'm in full possession of my faculties. I have your testimony. And I have something more important." "What?" "I have the truth, and I have control. He brought me here to get rid of me. Instead, he handed me my empire back." I stood and walked toward the office door, looking out at the lobby, where Rocio was comforting an elderly man and the guards kept order. It was chaos. Yes, there were leaks. Yes, the walls needed paint, and the debts were enormous. But it was mine. Come on, Anselmo. We have work to do. Review the accounts before the boy arrives. I want Rogelio to walk through that door and find himself facing an audit of his entire life. Rogelio arrived 2 days after my call, not the next day as I demanded. He pulled into the nursing home parking lot, skidding his imported truck, kicking up a cloud of gravel that dirted the freshly painted planters at the entrance. I watched it all from the window of my new office, standing, a cup of hot coffee, real ground coffee, the same now served every morning to all the residents, in my hands. I didn't feel the flip in my chest I used to feel when he'd visit the ranch, that motherly anxiety wanting everything perfect for her son, the meal ready, the house shining. That Leocadia had been buried under the rubble of his betrayal. What I felt was a cold, calculating calm, the same I felt watching a storm approach knowing the barn roof was already reinforced. "Mama!" he shouted from the lobby, ignoring the new receptionist trying to stop him. "Where are you? This is insane." He threw open my office door without knocking. He arrived sweaty, his linen shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and probably too much drinking over his beach weekend. Behind him, Anselmo entered calmly, closing the door gently and crossing his arms, leaning against the wood like a silent guardian. Rogelio stopped short seeing me. I sat behind the mahogany desk we'd brought in the day before to replace Poveda's cheap formica table. I wore a pearl grey tailored suit, my hair immaculate, my reading glasses perched on my nose. "Sit down, Rogelio," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me without looking up from the documents I was reviewing. "I'm not sitting," he roared, slamming his palms on the desk. "What the hell have you done?" "The ranch foreman called me. Says there are people surveying the land. Says machinery is moving in. Is it true you sold La Candelaria? Tell me it's a bad taste joke from your dementia." I removed my glasses slowly and looked him in the eyes. I saw fear in his pupils. Not fear for my health, not for my well-being. It was the fear of a parasite watching its host being torn away. "I don't have dementia, Rogelio. I have a medical certificate, signed before a notary 3 days ago, attesting to my perfect mental health. And yes, I sold the ranch. But you couldn't." His voice cracked into a pathetic squawk. "That land was mine, my inheritance. Dad promised it to me. Your father nearly lost that land at a poker table 30 years ago," I reminded him, my voice icy. "I was the one who saved it. I paid off the mortgages. I negotiated with the bank. The land belongs to whoever works it, Rogelio, and you have never once picked up a hoe in your life." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the small office like a caged animal. "The money," he stammered, stopping. "It must be millions. Where's Anselmo? He must have it in a trust, right? We're going to void the sale. We'll say you were coerced." "The money is invested," I said, lacing my fingers on the desk. "Every cent. Invested in what? Bonds? Stocks?" I gestured broadly around the room. "In this." Rogelio looked at the freshly painted walls, the clean window, the polished floor. He let out a hysterical laugh. "In this dump you spent the Montenegro fortune, a decrepit old folks' home. Mama, for God's sake. This is throwing money in the trash." "No, son. Throwing money in the trash is paying for a college career a boy never finishes. Throwing money away is financing the failed businesses of a man who prefers the beach to work. Buying this place wasn't an expense. It was a liberation." I stood. My shadow fell over him, and for a moment he seemed to shrink. "You left me here with a suitcase and a lie about termites," I said, my voice dropping a register, turning dangerous. "You told me you'd come back Friday. 4 Fridays passed. Rogelio. A whole month. Do you know what I ate that month? Ground up leftovers. Do you know how they treated me? Like an old piece of furniture. And you knew. You talked to Poveda. You knew they were sedating me so I wouldn't cause trouble. You knew the conditions were inhumane, and you didn't care. You only wanted me to die quickly so you could take everything. Rogelio went pale. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I didn't know it was that bad. Poveda told me. Shut up. The scream tore from my throat like a whip crack, startling even Anselmo. Don't you dare lie to me now. Rocio told me everything. You and your wife were already planning to remodel the big house. Already spending next season's harvest money. Well, it's over. The well has run dry, Rogelio. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a blue folder, sliding it toward him. What is this? He asked, his voice trembling. It's an itemized bill. It includes the cost of my stay here this past month, with late fees, since you forgot to pay the monthly rate. It also includes Anselmo's fees and the administrative costs of the new management. Rogelio looked at the paper without understanding. But you're the owner now. Exactly. And as the owner, I don't allow deadbeats in my establishment. You owe me 40,000 pesos, Rogelio, and I want it today. He looked at me with pure hatred. In that moment, the mask of a worried son fell away completely, and I saw the stranger I had raised. You have no heart, he spat. You're a bitter, vindictive old woman. I hope you rot in this place with your old people's piss. You'll never see your grandchildren again. My grandchildren are already adults, Rogelio, and they didn't even call me on my birthday. They've learned well from their father. As for rotting, I smiled, and it was a genuine smile. Oh no, my son. I've only just begun to bloom. Anselmo opened the door. I think it's time for you to leave, boy, the lawyer said firmly. And I suggest you don't try to challenge any of this. I have recordings, testimonies, and audits that could send you to prison for abandonment of an incapacitated person, if we decided to play that card. Your mother is being generous, letting you go with only the moral debt. Rogelio looked at both of us. He understood he had lost. He had no money for lawyers, no wit to fight Anselmo, and above all, he had no right on his side. He turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. I watched him get into his truck and drive away. I felt no pain. I felt what a surgeon must feel after removing a gangrenous tumor, relief, and the certainty that healing could finally begin. The following months were a whirlwind of activity that gave me my life back. With the remaining capital from La Candelaria's sale, we transformed the golden twilight into something unrecognizable. The first thing I did was change the name. We burned the old sign in a symbolic bonfire in the back patio. Now a polished bronze plaque at the entrance read, Hope Residence. I didn't hire an outside construction company for everything. I sought out my old ranch hands, loyal men left jobless after the sale. They came happily, bringing their tools and their work ethic. Together we fixed the roof, painted the walls in warm colors, soft yellows, terracottas, pale greens, and cleared the garden weeds to plant roses, bougainvillea, and of course, a small vegetable garden. My daily life changed radically. I was no longer the landowner giving orders from a horse or a distant office. Now I was Leocadia, the owner who rose at 5 to inspect the kitchen. I hired a nutritionist and 2 village cooks who knew how to make stews that tasted like home. The stale smell disappeared, replaced by the aroma of fresh-baked bread and pot coffee. Matilda, my roommate, bloomed like a late flower. With proper nutrition and dignified treatment, she traded her walker for a cane. We discovered she had been a piano teacher in her youth. I bought a second-hand piano, tuned it, and placed it in the common room. Now afternoons filled with old boleros that made the residents cry and sing. Rocio, the cleaning girl who lent me her phone, proved to be a natural leader. I paid for a course in geriatric administration and named her floor manager. She became my eyes and hands when I needed rest. Watching her grow, watching her lead with sweetness but firmness, gave me a satisfaction I never felt watching Rogelio waste his life. She was the daughter I never had. But it wasn't all easy. There were nights I missed La Candelaria with a physical intensity. I missed the absolute silence of the countryside, the song of the crickets, the solitude of my vast bedroom. Here there was never total silence. There was always someone coughing, someone calling out, the sound of life and death intertwined. And yet, every time nostalgia struck, I looked at Don Gregorio. The blind man who once lived huddled in a corner now spent mornings in the garden growing tomatoes in raised planters we built especially so he wouldn't have to bend. He told me he could see the plants growing with his fingers. "You gave us our lives back, Dona Leocadia," he told me one afternoon, handing me a ripe red tomato. "We thought we were here to wait for the end, but you taught us there's still road ahead." That sentence was worth more than 300 hectares of coffee. A year after the purchase, I received a letter from a law firm. It was from Rogelio. He wasn't suing me, to my surprise. It was a brief, dry letter informing me he was moving north with his wife to try his luck in another business. No apology, no asking how I was. Just fleeing as he always had. I tore up the letter and threw it into the garden compost. Let it serve as fertilizer, I thought. At least that way it'll be useful for something. Anselmo visited me that very day. He had fully retired by then, but still came on Fridays to play dominoes with the residents and check that my papers were in order. "You look different, Leocadia," he told me, watching me as we drank tea on the new terrace. "Younger, maybe?" I touched my face. The wrinkles were still there, deep as canyons, and my hair was whiter than ever, but I knew what he meant. "It's purpose, Anselmo," I answered, looking toward the garden where Matilda played piano for a group of visitors. Before, my purpose was to preserve a legacy for someone who didn't deserve it. I worked for the past and for the future, but I never lived in the present. Now my purpose is that every day counts, for them and for me. "You made a good deal," he said, smiling. "And I'm not talking about money. The best of my life." That evening I sat alone on the garden bench, the same bench where I had waited for Rogelio that first month. But it was no longer a splintered wooden bench. We had sanded and varnished it, added comfortable cushions. The sun was setting, painting the sky those oranges and violets I loved so much. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. It smelled of jasmine and watered earth. I thought of all the women my age sitting in armchairs staring at the door, waiting for a visit that never comes. Women who believe their useful life ended because their children no longer need them, or because society tells them they're a burden. Women who stay silent so as not to bother, who accept scraps of affection and food. If I could tell them something, if I could shout it across the distance, I would say this: don't wait. No one is coming to save you on a white horse, and sometimes not even in a family car. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Love is proven through actions, not promises to return on Friday. Don't be afraid to burn the ships. Don't be afraid to sell the ranch, the jewelry, the memories, if that buys your freedom and your dignity. Our greatest wealth isn't the land or the bank accounts. It's our will, that stubborn old strength that has kept us standing through childbirth, losses, and disappointments. I, Leocadia Montenegro, at 75 years old, lost a son but gained a family of 50 people. I lost my house, but I found my home. And I learned that as long as there's breath in the body and fire in the gut, it's never too late to slam your fist on the table, by your own cage, and turn it into a palace. Life doesn't end when they leave you in a nursing home. Sometimes, only sometimes, that's exactly where it truly begins, if you have the courage to take the reins and remember who the hell you are. I rose from the bench. It was growing dark, the air turning cool. I heard the dinner bell and Rocio's laughter guiding the residents to the dining hall. I smoothed my dress, lifted my chin, and walked toward the warm light of the entrance. I had work to do. I had people to care for. And for the first time in many years, I was in a hurry to live.